Hello, my name is Jeff Clark and I'm production manager for The Goose. And I actually need you to know that I asked permission to come and say something to you all. If you haven't read this book yet, do yourself a favor. It's really, really, really one of those transformative pieces. I know we read lots of good books, and most of us here are readers, but sometimes there are books that just sort of have a hinge in them, where there's a pivot in your life. At least for me, this book is one of my hinge books. It's pivotal. I strongly encourage you to get Frank Schaeffer's book. Bless you.
Well, speaking as an author, that is the kind of introduction I like. The heck with who he is or where he studied or didn't study in my case. Just buy that damn book. So, with no further ado, let me begin today's session by actually doing a little reading from this, because I want to give you a flavor of my talk that is drawn from the title of the book, which is Why I Am an Atheist Who Believes in God. And the subtitle is How to Give Love, Create Beauty, and Find Peace. So I want to read you a little bit from chapter 3, and I'm not going to give you any setup or introduction, and you can draw your own conclusions. And then I'd like to talk for a while, then I want to throw it open to some Q&A for a while, and then guess what? I have a couple of books here, which we will move to the outside there for anybody who wants one, and we can get it, but we'll move the book marketing thing over there for the simple reason that otherwise we'll screw the whole venue up. My youngest grandchild, Lucy, and her brother Jack, by the way, ages 5 and 3, are still comfortable with a paradoxical way of seeing reality. For them, make-believe and the material universe merge in a poetic, non-literal way that mirrors the scientific finding that one particle can instantaneously affect another particle light years away, or even be in two places at once. Schrödinger, the Austrian physicist who developed the field of quantum theory, called this idea entanglement. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Lucy and Jack just accept that life is weird, wonderful, and defined by imagination. Lucy and Jack seem to accept that something may never have happened, but can still be true. They take Bible stories we read at face value, and yet I see a flicker in their eyes that tells me that they already know the stories are not true in the same way that boiling water is true and can be tested. It's hot. When they're older, maybe my grandchildren will embrace apophatic theology, the theology of not knowing. Maybe they will look for ways to make the irrational rational by hiding behind words like mystery in order to sustain their faith. Apophatic theology teaches that the divine is ineffable and recognized only when it is felt. In contrast to the literalistic evangelicals and Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Muslims and Orthodox Jews, some of the earliest church fathers were closer in their thinking to apophatic theology than they are to rationalism. They said that Scripture was to be read through an apophatic approach. Tertullian said, that which is infinite is known only to itself. St. Cyril of Jerusalem said, for we may not explain what God is, but candidly confess that we have not exact knowledge concerning him. In other words, the word God was to be understood by not understanding it. The words objective reality are just a metaphor for something I'll never encounter. Lucy and Jack's universe is more dependable and predictable than mine. They still think that what they observe is what is there. Their world is a safe place where their parents stay married, and there's no need to justify clinging to a sustaining myth by embracing fancy terms like apophatic or mystery. My son John and his wife Becky come home after work each day, and routines are kept. Ba, that's me, and Nana, that's Jeannie. That's Jeannie right there, that Jeannie, my wife, are always at Ba and Nana's house, and Jack and Lucy still believe that Jeannie and I can answer their questions, even guarantee the future. At the ripe old age of 5, Lucy was pondering death. She asked why my mother had died, and I told her it was because Mom was very old. Then a dear friend of mine who was only 50, Holly Mead, died. A few weeks later, as we walked up the drive, Lucy took my hand and quietly said, "Ba, when you pray in the morning, please ask God to make you grow old slowly." "Okay, I will," I said. A few days later, we were walking up the drive again, and I said, "How long do you want me to live?" Lucy thought about it for a long moment and then answered, "Ba, I want you to live until my children are 12 years old." "Okay, I'll try," I said. Of course, I have no idea what the right age is to die, just as Lucy thinks 12 is old. She also told me the sun is really big, even though it looks small. I asked her how big, and she said, "It's really big as a tree." Lucy's sense of time, place, and scale is no more or less misinformed than mine. The only things in life I have fairly complete information about are minor household appliances. As for when to die, what to believe, whom to marry, where to live, whether or not God exists, when to have children, and what work to do, I think all this big stuff as big as a tree, is best left to chance. My illusion of control over my life is long gone. I am part of a story. I am not the story. I've given up on planning. Rather, I plan while hoping that my plans won't work. I've experienced the serendipity of my plans failing. Then my failures sometimes open doors to things better than those I wished for. Anyway, since no one is ever just one thing, who are we planning for? Which me should be running the show? We're all in the closet, so to speak. We barely come out to ourselves and never completely to others. I've never met an unequivocal atheist or religious believer. I've only met people of 2, 3, or more minds, people just like me. Atheists sometimes pray, and eloquent preachers secretly harbor doubts. The evangelist Billy Graham preached certain salvation and heaven guaranteed, yet privately told my dad, a dear friend and fellow evangelist, that he feared death and had many doubts. We're all of at least 2 minds. We play a role and define that role as me because labels and membership in a tribe make the world feel a little safer. When I was raising my children, I pretended to be grown-up daddy. But alone with my thoughts, I was just me. I'm older now, and some younger people think I know something. I do. I know how much I can never know. Muslim, Jew, Hindu, or Christian, you are that because of where and when you were born. If you are an atheist, you are that because of a book or 2 you read, or who your parents were, and the century in which you were born. Don't delude yourself. There are no good reasons for anything, just circumstances. Don't delude yourself. You may describe yourself to others by claiming the label of atheist, Jew, evangelical, gay, or straight. You know that you are really lots more complicated than that, a gene-driven primate and something more. Want to be sure you have the truth about yourself and want to be consistent to that truth? Then prepare to go mad. Or prepare to turn off your brain and cling to some form or other of fundamentalism, be that religious or secular. You will always be more than one person. You will always embody contradiction. You, like some sort of quantum mechanic physics experiment, will always be in 2 places at once. So that's a little taste of the book. Most of it is told in stories, including Lucy and Jack and other people that really mean something to me in my life. My wife Jeannie, who's sitting here today. But I'd like to set up my talk with that reading to give you a flavor of the book and the kind of discussion I have with myself in that book that surrounds what I'm about to talk about here, and then we'll have some questions. I think one of the great burdens of my own struggle in my own life that could be summed up by trying to decide whether God hates me and will punish me and burn me if I believe incorrectly was the realization, as I began to help with my 5 grandchildren, the 3 that I talked about here in the States and 2 who live in Europe, that long after I got over my addiction to Reformed Calvinist theology, and by the way, I heard a good thing the other day. Someone said, religion is a neurological disease, faith is the cure. Said a lot to me. But as I moved away from that, and I began to realize that as a real jerk who has not always been a good person and won't be again today, at some point, that if in a short arc of 62 years I could learn to be a better grandfather than a dictatorial father, teenage brat who had these kids, who young Jeannie and I got pregnant at 17 and 18, slapped his daughter, yelled at his kids, combined that with Reformed theology that said I was the head of the household, should be in charge of everything, my wife should be subservient to me, my kids should grow up listening to me. This was part of God's natural order behind those slaps, as it were. Someone who moved in a trajectory that brings me to the place walking up the drive with Lucy and looking into her face and seeing nothing but unconditional love and trust, not fear, which is a big change from what I saw in my children's face as a teenage father sometimes. If that can be my trajectory, and as someone who actually believes at times and always hopes that not only is God real, but there is a loving creator and a personal heart to the universe, and senses that growing empathy in that 62-year arc, if that can happen in one short lifetime, then surely the source of that empathy and love can not be seen to be meaner than I am. And there is no condition on earth, getting my eyes poked out, shot and killed, let alone being believed about wrong by a child, that would induce me to burn one of my grandchildren for eternity because they thought I had 6 arms, or there were 6 of us, or I was a goddess, or Jesus was not Lord, or whatever it may be. The book from which that comes is not the Bible. Evangelicals define themselves as people of the book. What a horrible indictment. I thought we were people of the universe. And that the witness of God, if there is a God, is this, everything. I describe that as looking up at night when I step out of my studio in the morning to pee on the lawn because I'm too lazy to go to the bathroom. Suddenly you look up at the sky and you realize you're peeing on a spaceship that's hurtling through space into the cosmos. And when you have those realizations, and if you have to pee, go ahead, but you can look up without peeing. You're allowed to do this. You understand very quickly that this message of love is not written in moralistic terms of right and wrong and sin and goodness. It's written in a very different language that I think as a painter and a writer, I understand, if I may be very bold, better than many theologians who are people of the book by profession. And that is the only real language of the universe that speaks to me of a God and of faith and of what is worthwhile in life and why I enjoy being with Lucy and doing the things I do and taking care of these grandchildren is not a moral paradigm, but an aesthetic paradigm. Think about the definition of evil for a moment. There's only really one. It isn't death. Every child gassed in Auschwitz was going to die someday. It isn't wrong actions based on wrong belief and a kind of a litmus test of like, you do this, you don't do this. Think about a better definition of what is right and wrong, and unless I'm much mistaken, this is a much more accurate definition of what we really mean by the word and relieves us of the moralistic burden we all carry if we come from certain kinds of religious backgrounds. It's an aesthetic division. It's an aesthetic definition, and it goes like this. It's not a question of what would Jesus do, and this may be the same question put in a different way. Ask yourself a different question when you consider anything. 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 Is it beautiful? If you think about it, can you think of one horrible thing that has ever happened to you or another person or was done to someone or done to this earth, that could be defined as beauty. When you relieve yourself and others of this moralistic imposition of rules and regulations based on this crazy Protestant notion and the Roman Catholic notion before that God is measuring you according to passing an exam on theology of correct belief, and that you are a person of the book, not of the universe, and that according to your faith, you have to believe in the book, not in God, let alone God's Son Jesus, through whom the book only has meaning as defined through his reading, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that the moralistic set of rules that are imposed are like ticking off an exam for a driving ed course, as opposed to actually living a faith within the entirety of the existence we've been given. So when we replace this kind of moralistic paradigm with the question, is it beautiful? We have an accurate description, I feel, using metaphors, which is what words are, so nothing's really accurate, but better than moralism, with which to look at our own actions and relationships. If you look at your fatherhood, your parenthood, your grandparenthood, your relationship as a lover or a partner, and how you treat people by the standard, is it beautiful? You start asking yourself a question. And I know these are intense examples. What's wrong with poking somebody's eyes out while they sleep because you're annoyed with them? I've never done that. Well, we're all going to go blind sometime. My mom had macular degeneration. The eye fails. We will die. It will rot. It will be burnt. What's wrong is that they won't be able to walk out of this tent and look up into the sunlight coming through the leaves. They will not be able to look into the face of their equivalent of Lucy and Jack and see unconditional love there and realize that that 62-year passage has taught them something, and here are children who are unafraid and expect nothing but goodness. What is the tragedy of having your hearing blown out and a grenade being tossed near you if you're a soldier in our endless wars? The tragedy is not silence. Silence can lead to contemplation. It's that next time Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto is playing, you cannot shed the tears you would have shed. You do not hear the voice of God in St. Matthew's Passion. You do not hear, I love you and I forgive you, from a wife or a husband or a lover or a partner you've wronged again. Beauty, the aesthetics, the creation of beauty, is the giving of love. And real relationships are defined by the fact that they have an aesthetic quality to them. The act of bringing Jeannie a cup of coffee in bed, which is a sacrament in my life if I see she's up, has nothing to do with saving her the walk down to the kitchen. It's that the experience of her sitting in bed right now, reading Charles Marsh's fabulous 580-page book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer right now, is a beautiful experience for her as an intensely busy woman, taking care of grandchildren, running a company, doing this and that, putting up with me. By the way, I have to laugh. People email me and say, have one of your people send me something. It's like, okay. Jeannie, can you do this so I feel like I have a team? They must think I'm still an evangelical with a big team of people, you know. Half of them would be relatives on a very high payroll, and we'd have our own jet. But never mind, that's a different deal. That said, what's that cup of coffee really mean? It doesn't mean you need your caffeine shot, which she does. We both get headaches without that. We are drug addicts, I just told you. It means I know you're sitting in bed for another half an hour reading a book that you're totally enthralled by is a beautiful experience. Because through that book, you're communicating not just with Charles Marsh, a brilliant author. You are communicating with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And you were finding out in Charlie Marsh's book that he was an evangelical hero, but one thing they don't want to mention is that he was also very gay. And you're going to be reading funny stories about the fact that he went to great lengths to get matching tennis socks and had a tailor he liked, and all the stuff that's left out of the evangelical accounts because evangelicals want their martyrs to not be the kind of people that they do legislation to prevent from getting married. They don't want the one person in World War II who really stood up to Hitler in Germany to be a gay man, who was more interested in his tennis whites and his outfits that he bought in Spain from a really good tailor than he was in reading Karl Barth's theology, who, by the way, after Bonhoeffer had been in Spain for a while, said, I don't think that Karl Barth ever would have written his books if he had lived here. It's too sunny and nice. You have to be indoors in Northern Europe to think theology. So that's not the Bonhoeffer Christianity Today magazine wants to sell you. They want to sell you an evangelical clone, just like they don't want to sell you a drunk, but they want C.S. Lewis to be this evangelical, not a high church mystic who believed that there really wasn't a hell and you could talk your way out of it on a bus if you thought good thoughts. So they whitewash that stuff. Well, similarly, to get back to the track here, when we look at the kind of journey a lot of us have taken, you have to understand that the theology will fade away. I have a passage in the book where I say, I guarantee you something. If you reread this book in 10 years, it will be a different book. There's nothing magical about the letters rearranging themselves. You've rearranged yourself because your brain's growing. And if I reread it in 20 years, I'll say I never would have written this because I'm on a journey too. So when you look at life and you're saying to yourself, what do I come up with to give me a guide here? It isn't morality. Because morality only makes a difference because of aesthetics. What was more beautiful or more ugly when Jesus told Mary and Martha to buck the Jewish tradition, buck the Middle East tradition, buck the tradition of misogyny, and get the hell out of the kitchen and come talk to me, a male that is not your brother, your father, or you're married to, something that in today's world controlled by the Taliban, for instance, would be something that you might get stoned for, and the Middle East in the time of Jesus was that culture. Come out of the kitchen. None more of this women's work. Let's talk. What was more beautiful or more ugly? A Samaritan woman at the well. I want to talk to you. Oh, stranger men don't talk to women. Women should shut up like Paul told them to later and just sit down and be quiet. Hey, I don't care where you worship or what tribe you belong to. In the end, none of this matters. It's all faith and spirit. If you look at the ministry of Jesus Christ through the lens of aesthetics, the creation of beautiful situations, opening doors for beauty for other people, you have a much better guide than theology. And you can defend and you can see his ministry in that light. You can also see your life in that light. Think of every bad decision you've ever made. What was bad about it? It either made you or someone else suffer ugliness or deprive someone of beauty. How is Jeannie supposed to have a beautiful life when I'm shouting at her and taking out my frustrations on her? How is my child supposed to explore who they are as a person when they're afraid to spill paint all over the kitchen floor because they might get smacked? It is the ugliness and the depriving of the freedom that leads to beauty that is what sin is. Think about it. It isn't a set of rules. What is more beautiful? Two gay men who love each other having the opportunity to raise children, or two gay women having the opportunity to love each other and be together and share what Jeannie and I have as I bring her a cup of coffee in bed, or me saying, sorry. The experience of allowing your lover to read a little longer, the experience of having a grandchild, the experience of having a little kid climb into your lap, that door's closed to you because you have different genitalia than me. That door's closed to you because you were fill in the blank than me. What is the basis of civil rights? Why is Martin Luther King Jr. a hero? Because the road to beauty is the road that was closed by discrimination, by segregation. The road, why was it important for small African American children to get a good education? So they could work on Wall Street? No. So they could read a book and see the beauty of the written word. So they could get to know an author who's been dead 500 years and understand you're not alone, child. You may be in some small town somewhere. You may be cut off from everything, but you own this. You own this. This author, this is your brother. We're not going to deprive you of it because of the color of your skin. We're not going to take your children away because you are gay. We are not going to tell you that because you had an abortion, God hates you now, and you somehow are outside the kingdom. When having that child, at the time that you thought you were going to have that child, would have produced something ugly not only for yourself but for that child. And even if it's a mistake, we are not going to impose on you a moral system that says that our judgment of you is based on rules and regulations when life is organic. And we're all on a path of growth. And while you may change your mind or keep your mind about a decision, whatever it may be in particular, whether it has to do with career or sex or art or relationships or belief or faith, you have to understand that to take a kind of fact-based idea about it, to take this idea that somehow everything has to be on a page somewhere, stated in a verse, a rule that you've kept or disobeyed, a theological construct made by morons just as stupid as you, who don't know any more than you do, who have come up with this system and then dickered with it so now it looks permanent because they have buildings and they have seminaries and all this crap, that you are somehow bound by that. What is the message of the good part of all those seminaries and crap? It's the rose window in Schaeffer Cathedral that, as Bono once said in a concert tour in Milan, that he just stopped dead for a minute the way he does once in a while and takes everybody to church instead. And he says, you know, we're in the country, this is Italy, where cinema was invented. But he said, of course, the first movies were the stained glass windows in the Duomo, and the projectionist was the sun coming through. And you know, you could have heard a pin drop. And you just watch the whole mood of the crowd change, because suddenly he's connected them to something far bigger than simply being at a big rock concert. And he's not a rock god anymore for 10 seconds, he's a philosopher. And he's talking about what really matters, and beauty. That is the connection with people. The reason you keep a child if you're pregnant is not because of a rule. It is because if you're in the time of life where you want to experience the beauty of that child, it makes sense to have one. The reason you stay married to Jeannie for 44 years, we just had our anniversary, this is what happens when you get people pregnant as teenagers and you stay, and then you actually really fall in love. And I don't know who those stupid people were back there, but I know who we are, and we're still together. But no, I'm not fishing for anything here. No time. Anyway, take Jeannie out there and applaud her, and you can come over here and kick me. But the fact of the matter is, why does any of that matter? It's not because you kept some damn rule. It's because you have produced beauty. It is because you have lived a life or given others the opportunity to live a life that produced beauty. My mother read to me out loud. When my mom died and went away at age 98, still a big shock to be the last person standing, speaking of me and my team. Now you're the next guy up. Bad thing here. I told my son Francis the other day, oh, I'm in middle age now. He says, Dad? And I said, yes. He says, you're not going to live until you're 124. Who taught this kid to be so literal? I resent my kids getting to be the age I am, if you know what I'm saying. They're catching up. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, when you look at these situations and you say, what has gone wrong here? Why is the evangelical world from which a lot of us come so ugly? It's because they became people of the book, not people of the truth, not people of the beauty, not people of the life, not people of the art. We have lost sight of why any of the things that we do make sense. It isn't because you filled in the piece of paper right. And we've lost track of the fact that the real book that matters to us is not something that was a collection of texts put together by a bunch of Jews over many, many years and then collected into a canon in about the year 100 because they were scared of this squirrely Christian sect, which was a Jewish thing, who were adding this new stuff. And so they said, well, we better put something we call the Bible too. And then all of a sudden the Old Testament becomes the Old Testament. How does Jesus deal with these sacred texts? To my knowledge, don't correct me if I'm wrong, just go with it. To my knowledge, every time you see Jesus actually unfold the Torah, what is he doing? He's saying something very interesting when you think about it from the point of view of a Protestant evangelical that would immediately throw him out of their seminary. Why? Because he says, here's what the Torah says, in other words, the Bible, if you want to make it that. But you know what? That's not really the point. Here's what I say. Because it says stone her. It says don't talk to strange women. It says don't bring the women out of the kitchen. It says, God forbid, there's whole chapters on this, don't be touched or touch a bleeding woman. Menstruation is dirty, filthy. You will be defiled. I'm glad you touched me. Your faith has made you whole. Whatever you do, as 2 chapters in Leviticus say, don't touch a leper. He touches the leper. He doesn't heal arm's length. Okay, you've touched the leper, but please, God forbid, do not touch a corpse. He reaches out and touches dead bodies. And then he says, oh, by the way, all those heroes you have that are Jews, forget them. I'm going to tell you a story where your enemy, your hated, vilified, second-class citizen called a Samaritan is the only real hero. Oh, and who has the greatest faith in Israel? It happens to be a pagan Roman occupier. This is not the stuff of people of the book. This is the stuff of a higher call beyond any written description that says there is an overriding paradigm and ethic which rules. And that ethic is what we tap into. And guess what? It has a name. It's called evolution, because we are half-evolved primitive primates that are vicious. And what we do to each other and what we do to this planet proves it. We are nowhere on the scale of evolution at this point. We're an eye blink away from single-celled creatures in the mud. And yet, here you have this jerk standing in front of you who slapped his daughter, whose little granddaughter looks into his face with perfect trust. And so there is something that has entered this biological, mechanical, silent world in which we live, this world that came from energy and then from matter. And it is empathy. And if you look at the ministry of Jesus, and where I talk about it here in the book, in the person of Mother Maria, who was this very bad, dirty nun who had an illegitimate child and 2 marriages, and everybody thought that the bishop was crazy for letting her wear a habit. But when push came to shove, she was the one that helped the little Jewish children escape from the velodrome where they were being herded in Paris, took them out in garbage cans. She was the one who died in the concentration camp, having been someone who could have walked away. And she comes from the Orthodox church that I go to that's anti-Semitic to its core. And she bucked the whole trend. And she says, yeah, but not me, because I am following a different kind of example. And their lives will be beautiful. I want them to be able to look up at the sunshine, not the ceiling of a gas chamber. And the beauty of what she did gives me hope that as someone imperfect, as someone who has all these things, this baggage that I trail behind me, like one of Dickens's ghosts pulling the lockers on the chains, all the rest of it. As someone like that, you can look at a Mother Maria, you can say, listen, I can't understand Jesus. I don't trust the book he's imprisoned in, which is the way I see a lot of the Bible. Odd way to look at it, but I really do. But I'm going to try to read it through his eyes. And that is, okay, this is obviously nonsense, stoning some woman because somebody put a couple of inches of flesh into her and she lost her vagina, or somebody got touched by a bleeding woman, or whatever else. I'm going to look for something bigger than this. And it's a standard of what is beautiful. It's a standard of what gives life. It's a standard that Jesus followed when he said, come out of the kitchen, forget dinner, let's just talk. It's a standard that we see in the people who followed Jesus to death. This German gay young man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer. When all these nice, straight, white, cleaned up, pressed down Nazis that had compromised the church in Germany almost down to the last man, woman, and child were up against this dictatorship, this gay guy stands up and says, I'll die for that. And I'll take the risk. In fact, I'll return from Union Seminary in America where I'm safe. And I'll throw myself back into the lion's den and take the heat, because someone has to do the right thing. Someone has to call for beauty in the midst of ugliness. Those are our heroes. But they're people like us. And Jesus is saying the same thing. Well, he's not really saying anything. He's saying what somebody wrote down a couple hundred years later, said he said. But in the middle of all that, something comes through. And I look, and I'll finish here and we'll go to some questions. I look at the New Testament account of Jesus Christ and I say, isn't it amazing that the empathy survived the rule keepers, when later you see rule piled on rule by the church, but also the writers of the New Testament, who were obviously embarrassed by Jesus. They were worried about him. It says, one of the only accounts in all 4 Gospels is the fact that he lets this whore pour perfume on him, and they're all offended. And they kind of, you can even feel the kind of arms like, oh, because we're in an oral tradition and everybody knows this story, damn it, I got to write it down. But boy, I wish we could just go to Paul's telling women to shut up and be quiet, because that's much more Middle Eastern. The thing is, you got to think Taliban and Al-Qaeda to picture the context in which Jesus was doing these things. Saying, I don't give a shit about menstruation. Go ahead, be healed. I don't care about whether you're unclean. No problem. I'm not scared of touching a corpse. It's just a corpse. He could not have been more clearly out of sync with his period of history than if he had given us the formula for EMC squared. Serious. It's like a message to the future that would not be understood for thousands of years. And it's hardly understood today. And what it is, it's an evolutionary message that's saying, yes, you filthy primate that has crawled out of the slime and kills everything just for fun. I'm going to show you there's a different way. I didn't come to die for you. I came to live for you. I came to show you that there is another way to look at everything, and it isn't this stupid book of rules. And every time he refers to it, he says, well, it says, but here's what I'm telling you. It's Lucy and Jack understanding that a story might not have happened but could still be true. There is a meaning there, but it isn't the meaning of the superficial rule keeper who says, okay, here are the 7 things you must do and the 3 you must never do. So I think that freedom comes gradually in the spiritual journey, such as the one I talk about here in Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God. And that title is not meant to just be a smart-ass title to make you buy the book, that too. But it really is explained how to give love, create beauty, and find peace. And I'll tell you, finally, I'll end this talk with that and we'll do some questions. The how-to is to embrace paradox and stop looking for easy answers. Deal with it. It's the same how to have a 44-year relationship with somebody. Stop looking for the solution to a perfect marriage and now I know it all. Just bring Jeannie a cup of coffee this morning. And then do the next courteous, decent, ordinary, mundane, silly little thing that forms a glorious patchwork of a life lived with someone that you care about. That's the deal. Don't look for the quick solution. And it's the same thing with faith. Whatever age you are, if you're young right now and you're a fiery evangelical, you may wind up as an atheist. If you're an atheist right now, chances are you're going to be a Southern Baptist preacher. Fact of the matter is, we're on a journey. And it isn't a question of a journey that will never end. It's an ongoing process of life. It's called evolution, both personal and ethical, of learning to be a better grandfather than a father, and also evolution in the sense of the entire evolutionary picture. Who was Jesus? Jesus was a glimpse of the end point of ethical evolution 10,000, 20,000, 5 million years before we get there. This is what it looks like. And we are not there. And we've turned it into a system of rules and regulation and exclusion. It has absolutely been turned on its head. And so I'll give you this key one more time. The context in which you can begin to give love, create beauty, and then find peace for yourself while creating it for others is not to try to find the answer to, quote, theological or philosophical questions. It is to do your version of become the person Lucy trusts. The only mirror that matters in your house is the eyes of the people who know you best. What you see written there is the truth. It is not in a book. It's whether you see fear, love, annoyance, whether you see trust. And God help me, I hope this always remains so, but you could ask Lucy of the million things that would ever happen, and one of them would not be, Ba will hurt me. If you start seeing something written in the eyes of the people who know you best, that reflects the world in which you want to live most beautifully, then whether you're doing it because you have the theology, or you're a painter, or a poet, or an atheist, or an agnostic, is not the point. It's who you are that matters, the content of your character. And people say, well, then how do you judge what that is? Simple. Look into the faces of the people who know you best. Be honest with yourself about what's written there, and you will know yourself. So with that, I end this talk. I'll throw it up into questions. We're not going to pass a mic around. It takes too much time. Please keep your questions short. You can come over there to harangue me, but the question just keeps short. I will repeat it so you can all hear it. Then in about 20 minutes, I'm going to take 2 boxes of books out there with Jeannie and me and try to make some money. Because by the way, I earn my living as a writer. I don't have any other source. I'm not raising money. There's no ministry, no nothing, none of that. I'm just a working stiff with 15 books or so in print, and I fall or rise on how they do. So if you like this talk, by the way, and you have a choice between buying my book or telling 3 other people to, don't take the book. Just go help me make my living. Thank you. Okay, let's do some... Let's do a couple of questions here. Yes, sir, over there.
I have seen a crowd across the road
Right.
picketing this group. I'm going to go across the street and tell them
Yes.
that this place I have learned how to follow Jesus more than I've ever
Thank you.
known.
Thank you. Well, wait. In addition to which, take a box of my books over and sell it to them. Yes, ma'am.
I hear you talking about how to live your life. Talk some more about your atheism.
Right.
In terms of how that rose for you, what that
Sure.
has felt like.
The question is sort of mixing in the title, why I'm an atheist who believes in God. Talk about that a little bit. Listen, I wasn't kidding in the little piece I read you from the beginning. I know we all think in terms of math, and we all think in terms of black and white because we have that kind of evangelical salvation paradigm. You're saved or lost. That's like telling Lucy, you know, maybe I love you, maybe I don't. Everyone is saved. And so taking that approach, and I'm not talking about from God's wrath, I mean the journey we're on. Being an atheist on days when I don't believe anything, when I am cast in despair and doubt and depression, are not days when I'm closer or further from the truth, because on the days I believe, I'm believing wrong anyway. How do I know that? Because I don't know anything about God. Otherwise that would make me God. So belief is just a moving target on a path. You're never going to believe correctly. If you think you are, you're really an idiot. It's like someone saying, now I have painted the best painting that will ever be. I will never paint anything more. Then you're not an artist, because the first thing you do as an artist is look at it and say, shit. I have completely fucked up this part of the painting, and I'll do something like that. And that's how real life is. Parenthood, marriages. It's always do a little bit, oh crap. Do a little more, oh crap. My atheism is just the oh crap part. And I can't explain it better than that. But where I've changed is I don't have a problem with holding two ideas simultaneously, or 4 or 6. The little penny that dropped for me was the phrase, but I could be wrong. And arguing with Jeannie over the years has taught me to say that. Except in that case, I take the but out. It's just, I could be, am wrong. So that's the atheism part. And let's get over this saved, lost, in or out, gay or straight, male or female. What is this bullshit? We are primates and we're all screwed. There's only one kind of person. It's a semi-evolved primate. Like I said, no kidding. That's who we are. So, of course, you're not going to be right about belief. I love Hitchens and Dawkins and these other guys, just like I love Jerry Falwell and my father and everybody else. You know, we stand up out of the slime. 10 seconds later, we're making cosmological statements about the universe and everything in it. Are you fucking kidding me? I can't even find anywhere I'm going without a Garmin. And you want me to tell you whether God exists? Give me a break. However, I do see something in Jeannie's eyes when I bring her a cup of coffee that tells me that there's a certain path that exists that's tried and true, and that way love and joy and peace can be found. But it's in bite-sized pieces. Forget the big questions. Just deal with the real stuff that matters. And it's no different than writing. People say, how do I be a writer? Well, start writing something and make a first draft and begin to fix it, and it won't be so good, and keep going. There's no big how-to. You just take that next step. Yes, question over here.
I love the idea and the metaphor of beauty, and it sounds a lot like the Wesleyan idea of do no harm. First rule, do no harm. So my question is beauty, when you define it, is it contextual and individual, or is there some definition of beauty that's beyond us and more universal?
It's interesting. He asks, is it contextual or individual when it comes to defining beauty, or is there something beyond us? I think it's both. Obviously, it's a very individual question. I paint, and there are people who like my paintings. I'm sure there's some that don't. And I'm not saying they're worse people, but they just don't like them or something. Although I've never met one, but that's just because nobody's honest. But the fact is, yes, I think there are overriding things. I think within the evolutionary process, I don't mean universal standards of beauty, but they're doing all these weird things in musicology now where they play Western music to tribal people, for instance, in Borneo who have never heard it, and they say, does this thing make you feel sad or happy? And they can interpret Mozart the same way you can. It's nothing to do with cultural or anything. And we do the same thing. We know sad, happy. We know move your feet, sit still. We know all this kind of thing. This is human. So, yeah, I mean, that's why atonal music, best efforts of the critics and writers and the Bloomsbury Group and everybody else, but the English language still stands. It's Jean Genet that's not read so much anymore. Shakespeare's performed thousands of times a year. You can deconstruct, but there is something there. Now, I'm not saying I know what it is, but language means something, music means something. There's something innate in the human evolutionary construct of our brains. We look for patterns. Patterns lead to safety. Safety leads to survival. We don't like chaos. We like order. Mozart will be played 1,000 years from now. John Cage won't even be a blip on a dictionary. We won't even remember him. So that's nothing to do with the judgment of modernism. That's just aesthetics. Actually, there is something. Now, I'm going to get all romantic and gushy here and tell you that when it comes to these issues, the physicists say that energy, mind-blowing, just energy, precedes matter before the Big Bang. And then matter comes out, everything comes out of this explosion. But energy's there first. And of course, for me, as someone of faith on the days I am, I like to think that that energy has a name, and that is love. And I like to think that the entire outworking of creation is a demonstration from within of a pattern, which in the end becomes beautiful, and in the end expresses what love is, which is perfect beauty in every sense. Now, that's just my wishful thinking. I help put myself to sleep at night with that. I'll tell Lucy that until she says you're out of your mind. But it's where my hope lies. A vision of love at the core. That love is expressed beautifully. And it's being worked out in a process that is lethal. Because everything dies, everything gets killed, but out of this is coming this thing. Okay, that's just personal theorizing, bullshit cosmology, but it's my bullshit. And that's how I feel about it. So I think, yeah, there is a standard. I think there is out there somewhere, there's an objective standard of beauty. Maybe if you look at Hubble telescope pictures, you're looking at it. Yeah.
One of the hardest things Jesus said was to love our enemies, and you find that in the Bible,
Yeah, one of the hard things, the question is to love our enemies, and a lot of people these days we find as enemies, those of us who are, say, here at the Wild Goose, are people who say that they are speaking for Jesus, who misrepresent him. When I say Jesus introduced us to a pattern of ethical evolution, light years ahead of where we are now or will be for a long time, that's precisely what it is. The question isn't, can't I apply this and feel guilty if I don't? It's basically me as a fairly decent painter standing in front of Botticelli's Primavera and saying, I could work 40 lifetimes, I'll never get there. But this is what it really looks like, when you're combining this fantastic Greek mythology of, Athena standing there, with the three graces and everything else. I mean, this is when it all comes together for that blinding moment, or a piece of Shakespeare. That same sort of thing is, I think, in the life of Jesus. I think we have it wrong because, I don't mean you personally, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I think that we get it wrong because we always look at these admonitions as standards and we're saying to ourselves, if I don't apply this somehow, I'm bad. Rather than saying, yes, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'll do my bit to get there, but with no delusion that I can paint the Primavera. I'm going to just do what I can to create beauty in ugly situations, knowing full well I will fail because I'm a semi-evolved vicious primate. And I think if you look at yourself honestly like that, you're not always beating yourself saying, oh, how do I, and so forth and so on. Maybe you can sometimes, maybe you can't. It's the reality of the situation, but not taking these standards as moral constructs, but rather as a call to something more beautiful. So, for me, I look at Botticelli and I want to paint better, but I don't think I'm going to be Botticelli. I will not be hanging on the cross saying, forgive them for they know not what they do. Once in a while, someone will, like Mother Maria or like a Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And those are sort of mini Jesuses that say, this is possible. It isn't an impossible thing, but not most of us, I guess, are mini Jesuses. Yes, over there.
I heard your father speak about 40 years ago, and I really appreciated his books. I couldn't understand a lot of what he was saying. What I really appreciated as a student was that your parents really
Yes, they did.
and I'm just seeing your
Yeah.
philosophy of life that that's playing a large part.
Yeah, I just repeat for over here. The gentleman stood up and said that he appreciated my parents' books for many reasons, obviously, but one of them was they seriously talked about art. And the funny thing is sometimes I'm interviewed by people who are saying, you know, how does this all fit in with what your parents were doing or saying when it comes to this idea of beauty? Well, you know, why do you think my dad was wandering around the Uffizi Museum with me as a child, showing me Botticelli rather than teaching me theology? I mean, you know, in this case, literally, the apple has not fallen far from the tree. And if you take the last 6-7 years of his life away, when we all, partly my fault, as I talk about in my memoir, Crazy for God, got entangled with the religious right, you can agree or disagree with Francis Schaeffer, but he's not a creature of the ugly right. He's talking about art and philosophy and music and giving lectures on Bob Dylan and what the lyrics mean. Like it or don't like it, you know, this ain't Jerry Falwell. So the fact is, I come from a tradition that has taken art and culture and the creation of beauty seriously, and simply in my own theological journey away from the fundamentalist theological part that was also part of his baggage, I have brought what I think is the best of that tradition I was raised with me. And I talk in my book, for instance, about that very fact, that you can be right for the wrong reasons even. So thank you for the question. I appreciate the chance to talk about that. Yes, sir.
In your talk, you mentioned the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Right.
What is your relationship, if you don't mind sharing, if you're still
Sure.
attending at all, or?
What is my relationship to the Eastern Orthodox Church? None. I have a relationship to my local parish, the community to which I am committed. I go to church on Sundays because I feel guilty if I don't. I go to church on Sundays because my mother taught me to be comfortable going to church on Sundays. I go to church on Sundays because I like taking Lucy and Jack there, and I have a passage in my book about that, of what it means to me to stand in line for the chalice with these children. I go when I have faith, I go when I don't have faith, and then sometimes I quit altogether for a good long stretch because I'm just sick of the whole thing. But I find a refuge in liturgy that has nothing to do with the Eastern Orthodox Church any more than I am an American citizen, thereby means I approve of 14 years of war in Iraq. But I'm still here. This is my community. You're on earth, and like my dad always said, if you want perfection or nothing, you always will get nothing. And so I look around and I say I love this liturgical tradition for lots of reasons. I don't think anybody else should join to be saved. One reason I like my little local parish is we have atheists, agnostics, all kinds of people in it. We had a parish council president who was a lesbian. Nobody was like doing anything terrible about it. Yes, the Orthodox Church is terrible in lots of ways. It has been anti-Semitic. Right now in Russia, it is persecuting gay people. It is part of Vladimir Putin's bullshit. But then, hey, I have news for you. If I wanted a perfect church, there'd only be one member in it. It would be me. Then I'd look in the mirror and I'd say, the only person in this church is a complete asshole. So what am I doing here? So I take refuge in community and being able to share on that level. But to me, and I'm not getting Oprah-esque here, but to me, the liturgy is doing dishes after the food festival with someone who has breast cancer, and she's telling me about the fact she's going into another round of chemo just as her hair grew out, and me telling her that the leg I had when I had polio hurts, and me telling her that I'm worried about this child or grandchild, and we're in that to me is the liturgy. Now, the liturgy is the liturgy too, and I talk about it in the book, but I'm also very honest in saying, don't join this church, it's a mess. On the other hand, yours is too, probably. Maybe don't go anywhere. My atheist friends make a lot of sense doing that. It's not a question of trying to get people into my tradition. I'm just telling you that's where I happen to go to church, in the same way that I say I happen to live in Massachusetts. But I'm not making a big deal about it. So with that, we're going to take one more question, and then Jeannie and I are going to take 2 boxes of books out there for anybody that wants one, and sell you a book or sign it or something, or you can steal it. And seriously, if there's someone here who doesn't have the money to buy the book, just tell me and take it, because I'd like you to have it. But if you do have the money, then it's $12.99 on thing, and I'll sell it to you for $10 even, because we don't, whatever, and I'll sign it. But seriously, if you don't have any money and you're here on a shoestring, just come up and tell me. You still get a signed book. So anyways, one more question, and we'll call it a day. Yes, ma'am.
Yay! How did you forgive yourself?
How did I forgive myself? Actually, I'll be transparent on this. I haven't. There are so many things that I brood about And there's just so much baggage there in my lifetime, perhaps in yours, that is unforgivable, because the more attuned you are to the person you would like to become, say in the relationship with Lucy or someone else, the more you realize how you have failed yourself and those around you. But this is where grace has touched my life. So I haven't forgiven myself, but I have experienced grace touching my life. And I'll give you a little story of it that I actually have in the book. I'm not going to tell you any more about this book, or you're going to say, why? He's, okay. But what I'll do is there's like a paragraph, a short paragraph here. I'm going, yes, Joy's reminding me of something else. Joy Wallace, a good friend of mine. But let me read you a little something here that is actually apropos of this. And I will let you know a little touch of grace. You'd think that I knew where this was in the book. I'm going to tell you the story. Forget the book. It's in there. I was standing in the communion line, speaking of the Orthodox Church and why I like liturgy, because it gives us the rituals to process things in that moment of inner silence, feeling very depressed. A couple of years ago, Lucy was 3. And I've been taking her to church since she was born, and so literally I don't even know when she's riding on my hip. It's just she's there. So it's Lucy, Jack, and then we walk up to the liturgy, and you go towards the chalice slowly like this, and you gradually get there. And then once you're there, you kind of wake up and they feed you the liturgy with a spoon, literally spoon-fed, which I like. But in this particular case, I was shuffling forward, and I had shut my eyes, sort of knowing, feeling the person in front and behind, so you don't need to even look where you're going, and I'm kind of trudging forward. Lucy's in my arms. I've totally forgotten she's there. And I am plunged into feeling depressed, because I think I suffer from depression anyway. I don't know whether it's clinical or just having been an evangelical, either way. And I'm thinking about a lot of things. I'm thinking about a little girl that was just her age that I was a shit as a father to, who, by the way, is my best friend, and we Skype every day now. But that's grace. Not me. And I was thinking about all the stupidity of all the sermons I sat through, listening to them as if, they were going to explain something, and did I agree or not, and all the time, and just the whole weight of it. And then the crappy movies I made in Hollywood, and then the fact that I need a new car, and by the time I was done, it was like life is shit, and I'm a shit, and why am I even bothering, and what's the point? And I was really plunged into this sense of not forgiving myself for anything. And I'd forgotten Lucy was on my hip, and then I felt this little touch on my cheek. And I look up, actually startled, like, where am I? Having gone into this dark reverie, and I'm staring straight into this little face, 3 inches from mine, because she's right here. And she puts her hand on my cheek, and she's just looking into my eyes quizzically, like, where's Ba gone? And I kind of come back up from the depths, surface, open my eyes. There's little Lucy looking at me. And suddenly I realized the way she was looking into my face was without judgment or fear, just looking at who was standing there in front of her. Not this guy with tons of baggage, just the Ba she knew. Without all this baggage. And it really crashed into my mind. I have seen the face of God. Because this child only knows me now and doesn't know this other guy. She never met the other person. She knows me now. And all she's seeing is the person looking at her, and guess how she's looking at him? As he wishes he could look at himself. Because to her, I'm this perfect creature. She doesn't know any better. Jeannie will explain everything to her later. But honestly, for a minute, I had a vision of what grace, what that word means, and not just relationship with the divine, but with other human beings. And so you get these little glimpses, and that's one reason I like liturgy, because it provides you these quiet moments to have things happen like that once in a long while. But and I put that example in the book. But to me, it isn't a question of forgiving yourself. It is just being open to the gift of grace when it crashes into your life once in a while. And recognizing what it is. That is grace. I have seen the face of God. Forget the verses and the texts. There's someone, one person, who looks at me today the way I wish I could look at myself. I can't do it. But in these eyes, I am seen as I wish I had been. And to me, that's just like a gift. And it comes from nowhere. You can't buy that stuff, and you can't get ready for it. And you can study theology your whole life. It won't get you there. It's just be open to beauty when beauty comes to you. Thank you. We're done. I'm going to be over there with